Right, and we're live. This is the Coach Support Show where science meets strategy. And Watson, what are we starting with this week?
Well, welcome back. Happy start to 2025. We have spoken a lot in the past on this show with the extensive backlog of episodes that we've had. We've spoken an awful lot about, we've mentioned it about self-awareness on the part of the coach. And I thought it might be interesting just to run through maybe a framework, a sequence of steps that we can use to sort of guide our thinking and reflect on previous experience with our in-house head coach, which is you. So you're now the head coach of Nord, and you have a sample size of a number of weeks to reflect on. And I thought maybe we could go through a process of just some prompts to guide some thinking back to instances that might stand out to you, and we can go through this reflective sequence, this reflective framework, and just some background as to why that might be useful. As we've mentioned, self-awareness is an important thing for coaches, and how and why it's important, for example, is it's a source of learning for us. So, being reflective is a source of learning. So, developing self-awareness by reflecting on what we've done, thinking about it, thinking about whether it worked or it didn't, and then going as deep as we can. Things like, did what we do align with who we want to be as a coach? Were you aware of how you were interacting with players? Like, how were you communicating? Was that in line with how you prefer to do it? All that kind of stuff can build up this this sense of I know who I am. I know how I do things and how I want to do things in future, and I can guide my behavior in those directions. So yada yada yada. It's probably a fundamental piece of coaching. So do you come across as you wish to come across? Is that productive, and is that in line with the goals of your coaching? And how is that received by players? You might have not be even aware of that. So an important practice, self-reflection, reflective practice, key to developing self-awareness. And there are some frameworks that are quite popular in sports psychology literature and coaching literature. There's a few that we might touch on today, but I suppose one of them that we'll probably focus on is Gibbs' reflective framework, which is a cycle of steps. And it's Gibbs' reflective cycle, and it touches on an instant or a moment that you wish to maybe go deeper into and explore. It could be positive, it could be negative, or it could just be an average moment in your coaching experience, and we can just look into it and explore it and consider, are there things within that that you can think about in a bit of a deeper situation, a safe situation like this, although hopefully there are some viewers, but a safe situation. And are there learnings to be had from that? And that learning could be that we find something that we can form into a plan to then change, or it could be actually a source of self-confidence that you feel like you acted in line with who you want to be and how you wanted to come across, and that can reinforce your coaching approach and your future coaching. But either way, it's something we want to develop because actually self-reflection is good, and doing it habitually, turning it into a practice that we cultivate and get better at over time. We want to consistently do it and really maximize our ability to be self-aware and to act cohesively with who we are. So yeah, quite an important thing to do, and as I said, a fundamental piece of the coaching picture. So I've watched quite a lot of your Nord content. I've been enormously impressed. So from the opening presentation, the clarity that you presented your expectations, and not coming in with a this is how we're going to do things. There is room to build up our feeling about who we are and our identity first before we go through like the processes I want to do. I've seen a few reviews on the way. I've watched a few scrim reviews, presentations, meetings with coaches, that kind of stuff. But is there a moment you think that there is more juice in the lemon? Can we
Yes,
squeeze some more
yes,
value from something that's happened in the past so far?
definitely. I can even link the moment down below if you're watching this on YouTube. It was from our scrims yesterday. So playing against Lost Returns yesterday, Caedrel's team we'd lost to on Wednesday, but they're very good opponent to have, and that's very useful for us because there's not all that many opponents that we can scrim and stream publicly who are actually at a good enough level to give us good practice. So even though they're in the same league as us. Now we've played them in the group. We likely won't play them again for a long time, which is good. So it was a scrim against them. It was at the end of, I think, the third game. So 3 out of 5 done. And the first 2 games, I think we'd gone 1-1, but they hadn't been particularly good games. There's also this thing that always happens in professional league rosters where when you do a bunch of scrims in a row, the scrim environment is very different and what wins scrims is very different. And so you gradually convince yourself that how the game works in scrims is how the game works. And then you get into competitive games and you realize that that's not entirely the case or very much not the case, depending on how crazy your scrims are. And so, actually, in this third review, normally we talk about a couple of points. The team has been absolutely fantastic to work with. They're normally always it's civil but still direct and that kind of thing. It's all the kind of stuff that you'd want. And here we had a review that maybe for the first time got a bit openly, at least agitated, two of the players especially. And we ended up having the entire discussion about just 1 point. So we spent 20 minutes talking about 1 point. And even the chat in the stream afterwards was saying like, oh, that was a bit chaotic and that seemed a bit angry and stuff like that. But my instant reaction, which I stand by, was that is the most useful 20 minutes that we've had as a team. And one of those things that you can look back on and say, like, this was actually a fantastic moment. I'm so glad we had this. So that's why I think there's plenty more to get from it because there's ups and downs. There was already things that I've been thinking, even just having a quick glance at your framework that you sent over earlier. There's already things I'm thinking that I'd like to get into and I'd like to explore, get your opinion on of things that I could have done differently and all that kind of stuff. And the fantastic thing that we have now is that, like I said, like I can just link that below because it's public, it's happened, it's out there already.
Yeah.
There's also no reason to like tell it to you in a different way because you can just
Right.
watch it. There's no hiding behind it. So yeah, I would normally suggest to not let a conversation turn into an argument, turn into a 20-minute argument. And I think argument is the right word, but I actually think it was done I think the players did it in a very good way, to be honest. It was the first moment I felt like we let people really see that this is like a team that is genuinely like trying to win as well, where I think everyone's getting along like incredibly well, and they still are, of course. But there are always going to be these moments, when you're pushing to be the best, you can't just be nice to each other. And I'm very against niceness, as you know. I think absolutely we should be kind to each other, but I hate being nice to each other. I think that's stupid. We can go into that at another another point. So yeah, absolutely have this moment for it, which I think will be perfect. But I'm sure
Right.
there's absolutely loads that we could dive into. But this one I think is going to be the best for me at least.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you're already sort of taking it and trying to not trying to, but you're already providing some justification and some you're putting some direction on it as like it was useful, it was
Hmm.
necessary, as in that's how it went. That's how we're gonna do it again. But actually, if we stick with just this stage of description,
Sure.
so it was 1-1 in games.
I think so.
Well,
I can't even remember. In the end, we went 2-3. The last 2 games were much better, but I do think we lost one. So that means it must
yeah,
have been 1-1 in games. It was 1-1 in
and it was
games in game 3, which we lost. And we had fallen, I think, quite far behind, but then scaled into a point where the game, it wasn't even, but it was super late game. So we're actually playing for Elder Dragon, which is like the latest game objective. And what happened in terms of the gameplay is that we basically lost control of the mid wave. We had a bit of a split call. We had two different ideas of what we wanted to do, and then we ended up losing the whole game on this call. That's what happened in terms of the gameplay. That to me is almost the less important,
right.
to be
Yeah,
honest. But basically, what happened is the two players on our team who have the strongest voice around how they want to play the game, sort of completely disagreed about things, or they had this argument. Now, as is often the case, I don't know how I can't. I'm trying to work out how descriptive to be. So do correct me if this is wrong. As is always the case, in the end, they were actually saying almost the same thing,
Mhm.
but the way they were saying it were like, "No, I completely disagree. I can't see what you're saying. Like, there's no way I die here if I flash over the wall." And the other person's like, "We have to force a fight, otherwise we're just going to lose. And so you have to just flash in." That's obviously a
Yeah.
massive oversimplification, but it's like that kind of thing. And okay, I'm already going beyond the description, so I'll
It's
try and
good.
keep it to that. So that's what happened. We had a 20-minute argument, mostly between two players, but everyone else was chiming in, and I was chiming in as well to try and keep it like try and frame the discussion. But like I said, I
Mhm.
was intentionally not moving us on to the next point, not just summing things up and pushing us forward, not saying, okay, like let's calm down or anything like that, because it wasn't too aggressive or anything like this.
Yeah.
um so yeah, that's what happened, in
That's
terms of
great.
the details that I can sort of stick
And
to
it
at
was,
least.
obviously it was, everyone was online,
Yep.
and it was about 3 hours 20 into the
Yeah.
into the
Into a day.
scrim,
Yeah, and
into a
obviously
day,
solo
right?
queue before that as well, so 3 hours 20 into a team session.
Yeah.
From my point of view, the reason that, well, do you want me to get into like the reason why I let it go and those kind of things, or?
Uh, Maybe just before,
Sure.
let's stay in that moment.
Hmm.
So we've set the scene a little bit. I think for me, always interesting to see that, 3 hours and 20 minutes is a significant amount of time. Solo queue beforehand, you could imagine there's something going on there. But
Yeah, it's the day
let's
after
say,
a competitive day as well. That's worth saying.
well,
And
yeah,
and not only is that already tiring, but you're also dealing with people who have spent the last 10 years playing in competitive teams where you always have a day off after competitive games. So not only
right,
would you already be difficult, even if you're used to it, they're also not used to it at all. So both of these
right,
players are the most experienced, or joint, I guess, most experienced competitive players, both the ones who are the primary people involved in the argument.
okay. So then let's shift from the description of the scenes. We set the scene. Let's move a little bit into acknowledging the feelings and the thoughts in that moment. So maybe from your first of all, how were you feeling in that moment? Like, what was your emotional feeling, and then what were you thinking in that moment? I'll leave it
Sure.
there.
So for me, the biggest thing that we struggle with from a gameplay point of view, there are a few things that we struggle with from a team and communication point of view, which are being on the same page. But the biggest thing for me is that we don't put enough priority on the minion waves, basically, and that's the thing that always you get convinced of, from scrims, and then it's not the case in the competitive game. I can go into why, but it doesn't matter. It's just a universal truth. It seems to happen every time. And when I come into a team, I come in knowing that that's going to happen, and still partly get convinced, but also can't really make my point strong enough until we have some of these moments in like a competitive game, or in this scrim, or actually the scrim before our competitive game. So Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, all massively just the same problem. We're playing against people who put more priority on the waves than we do, and so therefore we can't really do anything. You feel really rushed, and it does become quite frustrating, to play, because you feel like you've got no time to do anything. So I do think that also builds to the frustration.
Mhm.
Um, from my point of view, the reason that I let the argument keep going was I was thinking we're very close to both agreeing that both and everyone agreeing that we just need to put way more priority on the waves, and that is in fact what we agreed after this discussion, which is why I
Mhm.
say it could be the most important 20 minutes that we've had, and it could be something that we look back to and say like that was a kind of real change moment, because that's where we first, sort of gave ourselves permission to play in this way. Um, as it was happening, I was, for most of it, completely fine with what was happening and the way it was being said. There are now some things that I think I should have done, because I think I could have got them to realize that they were on the same page a lot quicker.
Mhm.
So one of them was saying basically we should push this mid wave much more aggressively, and if they come around the mid wave, we should fight them for it. and also we should flank. The other one was saying we should look to fight them near the mid-wave so that we can push it in aggressively, and we shouldn't flank. So other than the flanking part, they're literally saying the same thing, but we spent 20 minutes going back and forward on it. The moment that I was actually a bit frustrated with was that, as often happens in these kind of heated discussions, people start to say things to make their point rather than things
Mm.
that they actually have really thought through and really genuinely believe. And one of the examples was used early on when they were definitely not agreeing, or thought they were definitely not agreeing, about flashing over the wall. And then even after they agreed and got on the same page and both realized that the other one was saying fundamentally the same thing, just a slight difference in how we should fight for the mid-wave, but both that we should fight for the mid-wave, one of them was like, but 10 minutes ago you said I should flash over the wall, and that I just don't see how that would ever work. And like bring us back to this point that you mentioned, as if we'd mentioned it in a really calm situation where like we're seriously proposing this
Mhm.
play. Not that he wasn't actually proposing this play. It's incredibly aggressive. It's not like it's just purely crazy. It's unbelievably aggressive, but that's fine. Like it's not. I don't want to make it seem like it was a thing that you would only say if you're in the middle of an argument, but you would only say it that way. So that was the one moment for me where I was almost like, oh, should I do something about that? But they're both very mature, very professional players, and they actually dealt with it very well. And they did come to this, like I say, they did come to this conclusion, and I was able to wrap it up without actually forcing it to wrap up, which is good. I think some
Mhm.
of the other players maybe read it in a slightly different way from me and read more into the negative side of it than the positive side of
Mhm.
it, because I've obviously checked with them since. And yeah, I think one of the things as well that makes it so much harder to do online with these kind of discussions, especially when you're online and you're not just shouting at each other, when you're
Yeah.
online and actually trying to have a heated argument rather than a shouting match, is that there's this micro delay on Discord. Doesn't matter how good your internet is, and so you really need to like wait to let the other person stop, but you're also trying to say something, and you just go back and forward, and you have a lot of situations where someone talks for 30 seconds and after the first 10 seconds you want to reply, and then in the next 20 seconds they say something that actually agrees with you, but you were so focused on that first 10 seconds that you then reply to just the beginning bit of what they said and all this kind of thing. So it's an interesting one, and to be honest, if I'd have been more active in it, I think it would have been also a great exercise to relook. I probably will rewatch it, but um, if I'd have been more active in it as well, um, I would have
Well,
rewatched
hold
it
that.
myself. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, hold that thought, because we come to alternative
Mhm.
ways of doing things a bit later. But
Mhm.
so I just want to dig into a few of these feelings, these emotions, these thought processes a little bit. So the frustration, knowing you a little bit, I imagine the frustration was not frustration with any personal individual. It was actually
Mm.
frustration with a team process that you wanted constructive talk moving forward, building on what's come before,
I
and
don't
you.
think I wasn't really frustrated about the whole thing. I
Okay,
was I actually could see, I think fairly early on, that they were saying the same thing, um, and that they were saying the thing that needed to be said. I might have even
right.
done that to the camera because I'm the camera's on the stream, but not the players don't see it. So I might have even been sort of merely celebrating it as it was going on. Um, I also would much rather be in a team that can have difficult conversations and also have. I really like the way Mac thinks about it, where you have each player, you have like a bank in your relationship with every other player, and you withdraw from it when you have these arguments, but you've got to also deposit into it. I'd much
Yeah,
rather that than a situation where we just keep it all so surface level that you never withdraw. I'd much rather be in a team where like we're gonna properly get to know each other and put time in to understand each other, and then when we need to have an argument, we will actually have an argument, and
yeah,
then we'll come together afterwards and be like, it's fine. Like we got this great learning from it. We should celebrate the great learning we got from it. You really pissed me
Mhm.
off in that 20 minutes. Fine. Like that's that's real, you know? Like if I think if you're it's like the level I don't know if it's in friendship or what, but the level of connection you have with someone, if they've never pissed you off, then my guess is you probably just really surface level with that person. Maybe that's a horrible thing to say. I'm not sure. So for me, I'd rather be in those situations. So it wasn't actually frustrating on my side. I think there was a lot of frustration with both those players, especially, and maybe some of the other players as well.
Mm.
Like listening to it, but that I can only speculate. You know, I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
they told me a few things about it, but I can't. I'm not in their heads. So
Yeah. No, for sure. And I love the team trust bank I've heard before. It's a nice thing
it's
to
a
think
very good
about.
metaphor. Yeah,
But we in this exercise, we want to dig into your
yeah,
experience. So
yeah,
the other things you mentioned were, so you were being deliberately a bit patient, a bit
mm,
not holding your tongue, but like giving them space
yeah,
for this to take place. And I think you could do that because it sounded to me like two things. One, you had trust in your players, so you trusted them to not let this boil over to something that was unproductive, but rather to reach a conclusion where if it wasn't useful then, it might be really useful to talk about later.
yeah. I guess we still don't know each other well enough to say that I fully trusted that. I guess the two things that I was thinking is that I trust that to quite a high level. I think that both of them have been absolutely great about it. And for example, at one point they had a discussion that was way lighter than this at the beginning of a review, and then after the review, one of them like they made sure to talk about it again and say, just wanted to make sure like I was just really asking like because I just felt lost and it was my mistake and all that kind of thing. So they'd already
Yeah.
demonstrated this like absolute perfect from my side. Like I don't need to do anything. So there's two things. There's
Nice.
that, and then I guess if I'm being completely honest, I was also trusting that I would find the right time to jump in and kill it if I needed to,
Yeah.
and I obviously do that a lot and have done that a lot. So it was two things. I won't claim that I have after a week of seeing them for how many like 10 hours. I have full trust that this will never blow over into something. But my point is that I think I know what I would do in those situations only
Yeah.
based on having done them before, which would be to basically shut it down and then pick it up after
Yeah.
the games. So the second part is honestly more important. And
That was my
I think that
my my
yeah, to be honest, some of the most big breakthrough moments I've ever had with players is when we actually pick it up again because they say like they're so used to coaches, it seems, saying, okay, no, we'll pick it up after scrims and then not picking it up after scrims.
yeah.
So actually, those have been like the best conversations. And that happens with every team and that happens with this team. There's moments where I'm obviously we're sharing a lot, but I don't want to talk about everything or things that are too personal. We've had a couple at least of kind of more difficult conversations, and as always they're never like pleasant to be involved with, but they've always been it's been like really good to having been done. And then you
Mm.
find out, as always, that first thing I said to them in that pre-scrim is I want you to be honest with me, and they've heard that 100 times, and whenever they actually have been honest with their coach, it's been terrible. So that's why they weren't. And then I've been like, no, seriously, tell me. And then we had a difficult but good discussion, and then afterwards they're like, it's been a bit of a like it's really worth doing those
Yeah.
kind of situations. So yeah, I think I trusted that they would do it well. I think they were already doing it well, but I also trusted that I could come in
Yeah.
and stop it if needed.
Confidence in your ability to wrap it up. That's another sort of thought process you were having. That's okay, great. So the next step would be evaluation, and I would encourage us here to think. I think on the whole, it sounds like this was good, a good experience, and so actually we could evaluate it quite easily as it was positive. But maybe I would encourage us to think there's probably a reason why you brought this up.
Hmm.
So could you evaluating it in the sense of maybe there might have been a more optimal way in your mind that this could have gone. So could we evaluate it in a bit more than just it was generally good? Like, is there Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like I say, there was bad moments in it for sure.
Okay.
Like this thing of jumping in on someone's detail that they said 10, 15 minutes ago. Um, I think in the moment I was thinking I'm not sure whether to have said something to say something about that. And even now, I'm not sure whether to say something about that. Um, and it wasn't just one person, it did on both sides get a bit sort of snipey. And there's moments where it's like done in a sort of insulting way, I guess,
Mm.
to each other. And maybe I'm mostly thinking about it as positive because just recent teams that I've been on, obviously it wasn't recent, but the last team that I've been on, this would have been like the most friendly discussion we'd had. so so maybe it's just I've just got too low standards. I'm sure and there was things that I definitely could have done, but this is where I kind of go back and forward on it. So wait, is changing what my approach would have been already this
Yeah.
part or the next part?
So I think next part would be, well, yeah, in 2 steps' time, it's what
Okay,
else could you have
okay,
done? So let's
okay.
save, like,
I'll
concrete
save it for
alternatives.
now.
But for the, just for this bit about, like, evaluating it, you can also, like, zoom out a little bit. Here, you might wanna touch a bit on your values as a coach because you could say, "Okay, it wasn't the most it wasn't a like, what an arbitrary thing to say, but it wasn't a 10 out of 10 conversation."
Mm,
Actually, it could be for you as an experience, it could be actually exactly why you're here as a coach, because you think that these are things that teams go through and they can actually benefit from.
mm.
So maybe it aligns with how you see coaching and it yeah.
It aligns with how I see high performance. That's for sure.
Right. Nice.
I think that I'm absolutely, like, quite clearly not someone who thinks that coaches should come in swinging their weight around and saying how things should be done and all that kind of stuff. And I do think that it's important and useful if we can build up a real strong connection with each other. But I also don't think that we need to be friends. And I do think that we should have difficult conversations. And I do think that sometimes my job is to either facilitate those difficult conversations, let them happen, or to even make them happen in certain teams and certain environments. And either, more usually I'm making them happen when it's just me and one player. Like I don't let them just say like it's fine when I know it's not fine. Like we're gonna get into why you're frustrated or pissed off, even if it's at me. Um, because I think making a difficult conversation happen in the group sounds like a very dangerous thing as soon as I said that. And I realized I'm not sure if I've ever actually done that. Um, yeah, so I think that is part of it for me, where I guess the main thing that I'm thinking, and maybe this is makes this situation not the best one to have picked, because for me it's not over. And
Mhm.
if this goes away and we don't carry on with it and we don't address it, both the actual argument itself, but also the conclusion, and we end up falling back into the same old bad habits, then it's absolutely not worth it. Like, this is only worth it. This wasn't a pleasant experience. This is only worth it if we get, you know, the gold from slaying the dragon or whatever. Like we've gone
Right.
through the trial part and we need to return with the elixir of life. If you're,
What an amazing analogy. That
that's
is phenomenal.
that's my MA on narrative structure coming back, the hero's
Okay.
journey. But the point is, if we don't do anything with that, and that's going to be on me, if we don't do anything with the situation that happened, then it's just a bit of unpleasantness for no reason. so
Yeah.
so that there's that, and that's why maybe it would be better to have reflected on this after doing the whole thing, because that's also where things are more likely to be like my decision that was maybe not optimal. The way I reintroduced this was not optimal, or the way we discussed this as a team, I could have done it in a different way. Because here it's almost like mostly I was watching and just being okay with the fact that it was going on. So yeah, hard to evaluate, and hard to find. I think that the reason that it jumped out to me when you were asking is because it's a very clear point, which I like the idea of doing a reflective exercise about a clear point rather than like the
Yeah.
whole day,
Mhm.
but also because of its important. I feel it's important.
Yeah.
So mostly it's the fact that I think that actually it's an important thing, and I also think it's important because we're streaming, and it's important to show that it should happen. And I think it was great from both Lucas and Eric that they showed that it, at least in my opinion, can be done in a fantastic way. Like
Yeah.
if that's what people mean when they say arguments among the team, then I'm all for them. Like we should have them all the time. It's just
Yeah.
mostly what people mean when they say arguments among the team is way worse than that, less productive and more personal and more insulting.
Yeah.
And so I guess those are the other reasons that obviously stands out.
Got it. Yeah, great. So actually, the next step would be analysis. So what else can we make of this situation? But you've already offered a few interpretations of this. So um, uh, just out and out interpersonal conflict doesn't seem to have been that. Useless. Actually, it won't be that as long as we get the opportunity to work through it. Even though it sounds like it, given the previous experience, I think players are actually set up to trust each other to
Mm,
find value in it. So
mm,
that's an alternative analysis of this, an alternative perspective on it. It sounds to me like actually it was coherent with your values, as you've expressed. Your evaluation of
mhm,
it seems to suggest it was coherent with your values. So I think the analysis of it has been said. So now the fun part. Uh, what else could have been done? What other
mm,
options
mm.
did you have available, and how could they have changed the situation
Yeah, and
or the
this is
outcome?
this is the part that's really interesting because it comes to exactly what we've spoken about before with the thing of how coach led it is or how player led it is, or democratic, dictatorial, all those good words that we discussed.
Yeah,
Um, I think there's a few things. Firstly, what I could have done differently is more quickly got them to realize that they were saying kind of the same thing. More quickly got them to realize that the actual most important thing about the situation, the part that will transition the most into later games, they completely agreed on. The specifics of this game, they disagreed on. And we're never going to be in that situation again. And to be honest, it's not even going to be that close because one of the things that the team that we're playing against has is someone who plays top lane incredibly differently from anyone else in the world. And so we were reacting to him when we shouldn't have been, basically. Um, but going through that experience together and as a group, not just the two of them, makes the chance that we'll actually keep this learning much higher. If we take the Joseph Campbell thing again, like it's the suffering and the earning it that makes you value the thing as well. So I do think that, like, I could have showed them the clip and say, guys, we need to fight on this midway. Like, what we can't ignore it because as soon as we ignore it, the game is lost. It doesn't matter what else happens with the fight, we lose the game. And that's what I wanted to have the conclusion of the clip before anyone started talking.
mm,
And so it's like, how much should I have steered it that way? And I could have maybe pushed them that way and finished it in 10 minutes rather than 20, or told them it and finished it in a couple of minutes rather than 20, if I just shut down any debate to the contrary, or did what I did and let them run the conversation and arrive at it after 20 minutes. And I think that's something that I'm always going to be kind of questioning. Again, because it's this issue, is what I said immediately afterwards, because someone was asking about it in the chat. Because it's this issue, I was okay letting it run as long as it took. And we'd agreed 20 minutes with Cadril, but if it had taken 25, I probably would have that's one of the times where, like, I don't like ever making a team wait, but that is one of the times where maybe you could say it's worth it. But the other thing is that could I have done a different exercise to get them to see they're on the same page while still coming from them? So the one that jumped to my mind when I first saw the thing that you showed me is like getting them to explain the other person's point of view, or because that's what I
nice.
would have done if I'd have sort of jumped in and tried to guide it more forcefully. Don't know if that's the right word. Like provide more of a framing and more of a structure. That's what
Hmm.
I would have done. Is I would have said, so for me, it sounds like Eric is saying this and Lucas is saying this, and hopefully got them to see that they're saying pretty much the same thing. But it might have also been worth it to have them do it for each other. There was a
Yeah.
debate once with Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson where they had multiple different debates. And after the first one, it was okay, but it got a bit messy by the end. It was like 2 hours or something. And at the beginning of the second one, the host actually said, I haven't told you guys we're going to do this, but I would like you to start by steel manning the other person's position. So give your best possible argument, opposite of a straw man, best possible argument for the other person's side. So maybe I could have done something like that. Like, okay, what do you think he's trying to say here? Like, what do you think is his perspective?
Hmm.
And if you just ask that directly, it would be like he wants me to die by flashing over the wall, or he wants to lose the game, or something like that. But if you say like, look, let's take some time. But I think you can't spring that kind of. Now I'm saying it out loud. I don't think you can spring that kind of exercise on people without like something beforehand. You know, going
Right.
through it and knowing that it's coming and doing it in a safer environment before you jump in with you're angry at this person. Now tell me the best version of what they're trying to say to you.
Yeah. That's in itself, that's really interesting because that sounds like a great thing to occasionally drop in. It sounds like one of those things you can have in your coaching toolbox. So that will bring us on to the next step, and we could go back and forth here. But would you say you might consider prepping the team around that tool and embrace them to use it in future?
Yeah, yeah. I hadn't thought about that until right now, but I think it could be quite an interesting one. We are going to have better opportunity to do that next week than in future. I
Hmm.
think technically, I'm still not allowed to talk about it for 20 minutes. But if we get to the end of the episode, I'll be able to say why that is. Um, so it could be an interesting one to discuss and to talk about, because I really like that idea, and it actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it ties into a lot of the other things that I like to do when working with a team. So the example that I always give, teams in Europe, people all over Europe, we think we're coming together as a team, we're going to have some values, and when we're all going to respect each other is always one that comes up, and people just leave it there. But respect to you is completely different from respect to me. And so I always like to try and push for a definition. And as always, I'll let the definition arise from the group. But the way that I would try to push it, if I could, is, for me, you show respect by not sugarcoating it or beating around the bush, not being super nice, because that isn't showing respect. That's like, you can't handle me telling you that what you did here is terrible for us and you cost us the game. And so I'm going to say, maybe it's not optimal for you to actually flash in and die here, you know? And we all know it's
Hmm.
silly, but you're adding that extra layer of niceness because you're trying to protect the other person. I don't think that's respectful, but I also don't think just telling someone what they did is wrong is respectful either. And the thing that I always say is, the way that we can actually show respect so that you know that I respect you is when I correct you, or when I say something is wrong, I offer you an alternative or a potential solution. Because it's like, I've put the time in to understand your position and to try and think of a better way to do this for both of us. And that shows that I respect you. And that then can tie to this exercise, where
Yeah.
you'll say, okay, maybe when we're having an argument, I might stop you and say, right, I want you to explain what the other person is seeing here. The
And
downside
the
is,
respect is,
yeah,
I've listened to you.
yeah,
I've been
exactly.
listening.
I've listened to you, and this is what I have understood from what you've said. Because what will inevitably happen in arguments like this, especially, is they just didn't understand that they were saying the same thing. And by the end of 20 minutes, they got to the point where they were saying pretty much the same thing, like I said, except from the in-game specific was, one person thought we should flank and one person thought we shouldn't. But that's just in this one game. There's no way that exact game happens again with a, what was it, 1-8 Sion who has 17, that he still has the most gold in the game, like that kind of thing. There will be obviously situations where they disagree about flanking or being together, but that's a separate point and much less important than the point that they did agree on. So
Yeah.
it could be that if we have that discussion about respect, I can then take it on to a thing of like, look, it's difficult, especially when you're in that moment, but I think it'd be so great to be able to try, right, like really pause, genuinely think about what the other person is trying to say and give me the best version of their play. Because what tends to happen is we just speculate about plays that didn't happen and say yours wouldn't work. And that's a bit silly. And that's actually also another thing that we've struggled with in a way, because people have such a strong opinion about the game. And if it's not the same, you don't have like one person who's been doing it for a year and one person who's been doing it for 5 years. And so you kind of just all tend towards the person who's been doing it for 5 years because they probably know the best. Now we've got like 3 different players who've been literally playing professionally for a decade in a game that has been professional for 11 years or something. Like they literally like right from the beginning. And so they're very confident in their play, and they probably like they can see it happening in their head correctly. And so trying to understand from the other person where it's like, if we had a different example. Okay, if we just came to Baron and hit it, we'd take it in time. And other people are like some people just really couldn't see it. Some people really could. And even just that moment of, okay, let's stop and try and give me the best version of their play is like, well, okay, they think that, right, if I just even ignored the waves, we would just run there and we would take it, and we'd either get it or they'd have to give us a front to back team fight where we win. Even that might just be super useful exercise. I don't know if it'll be too challenging, especially online, but it could be fun and could lead on exactly from talks that we were planning to have already.
I mean, it sounds so much like in the moment doing a cost benefit analysis, and then the team has to understand like how much risk do we tolerate to decide, what decision we go
It's
with.
exactly
But
that.
that sounds
Exactly.
that sounds really healthy. And if that was something you, as you said, giving them time to digest it, so introducing it ahead of the next scrim block where it might occur, that sounds really healthy. So, what I suppose we've completed the cycle. So we've completed the reflective cycle, and we've spent probably equal time in analyzing the situation, but also analyzing your experience of it and your thought processes within it. Sometimes when you do this, so if there's any coaches listening, sometimes it might have been more of an emotional situation for you as a coach, and then the later steps become quite difficult to tease out what exactly to do. Because, for example, you could imagine if that was an elite group of players and you're a new coach, how do you interject or interrupt when you're feeling like you're trying, like you should defer to them because they might you might perceive them to have more game knowledge, and that can be really hard to analyze, because then you're thinking about, well, alternative options was I just butt in and say stop, and then you anticipate all sorts of negative outcomes, or you sit there and you don't say anything, and then you try and have to justify that as giving respect to the players without losing credibility, and that can be very a fine line. But I think a lot of those situations, always the action plans are the important part. What will you do, having acknowledged those feelings, to try and feel better in the moment when that comes up, but also preempt them with communication and understanding on the part of the team. So
Yeah. I think as well, like even in those situations, it's so useful to do these kind of reflections, because so often, like you said there, you sort of post rationalize it and you say like, oh, I was giving
yeah,
space to the players, whereas in reality you're like, you were too afraid to speak
petrified.
up or something like that.
Yeah.
I think that's so good. There's it just reminds me of there's a quote that I really like. I can't remember who it is because I heard it first from a guy called Rory Sutherland, but it wasn't his quote. It's maybe Jonathan Haidt, I think it is, who says, our conscious mind, or us, we like to imagine that it's the Oval Office, but in reality, it's the press office. Like, we like to imagine it's the place where all the decisions are made, but really what happens is we react, and then we justify the decision afterwards and say like, oh yeah, I'm giving space to the players, and they're just like shouting, screaming at each other. We're like, yeah, no, I'm giving space. So, or it's good for the content, or something like that. Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
I do think as well, something you're mentioning, that there are other situations that I had thought about suggesting here, which might have had a very different outcome and maybe slightly less positive. But also now we're of course balancing the fact that while this is great for me, it's also being streamed and online. So I think this one is a good one to do. So I don't want to make it seem like, for people listening, that this is the most difficult situation that's happened and all that kind of stuff. It's just balancing the line of more personal things and not. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And what
as this is online already. So
what I really like about all this, though, is that there is a clear line between your values of a coach and how you act. And whilst there might be, on the surface, things that appear to be less comfortable, like this review situation, actually, it is coherent. So I think you can step away from it thinking that in a sense, that's how I want to coach, and I can feel good about that. So
yeah,
that's really an
yeah.
important point.
I I guess one thing though, based on what we said, if I'm being completely like honest with myself, is that the one thing from this situation that is possibly me just post rationalizing, although I don't think it is, but I don't know how you would really realize, is that I know this is going to happen. Like I said, I know that we're going to gradually distract ourselves from the fact that waves are the most important thing. And I say in the very first pre-scrim that for me, tempo is the most important thing, waves are the most important thing, and then I let us be distracted by other things. And I'm not more vertical about the fact that, or more like, no, we need to focus on the waves, about the fact that, yeah, about that. And I do think, I think that getting to it this way is better. And now we got to it better.
Mhm.
And I guess still we're 1-1, which is what our predicted probably thing was for the week, because the other big team has been playing together since November. So we've had like 20 games by our first game, and they've had just 80 or something. So,
Mhm.
yeah, no, I just suddenly thought of that. Like, I don't know how you'd even work out if you were post rationalizing something, really. Am I saying it because I'm actually, even though I've been doing this for so long, when I come into a new team, I'm not confident enough with the new team originally. And then I gradually build up the confidence by getting to know them better so that I can actually enforce the way that I want to play? Or is it because of what I say, which is that I like to let them have a say in it, and I'd rather lead them in a way to let them tell it to me and all that kind of stuff. So it's an
I
interesting
think
one to think about.
the a colleague of mine, but also like the Eminem school of thought. So, are your palms sweaty in the moment or not? And if they are, it might be post rationalizing. So,
Okay,
um,
I
but
think I'm okay
no, I
then. I
think
think I'm all right.
if you're sitting there completely zen in the moment, I think
Mm.
you're being deliberate, you're being intentional about it. So, yeah, but fascinating. So, I mean, essentially, that was a Gibbs reflective cycle. We are reflecting on an instance, and we're trying to be guided by your experience, and we're trying to dissect your experience and consider alternatives and either strengthen what you did or come up with new ways of doing that might improve your practice, your coaching practice in future. The key is to do this habitually, so to make this something that you actually do often. And there are other models, so we won't go through it today, but there's a simpler one is what, so what, now what. So the what is exactly that, breaking down the situation, what happened, but also what you felt and what you experienced and what you did and maybe why you did that. So what is sort of understanding the context, why was that actually important? Why does it matter? Why do we need to dissect it? And then now what? So as a result of that, what do we do more of? What do we do less of? And that, just doing that habitually over time, can really help draw your awareness to who you are in those moments, who you are in a scrum review. Who are you late in the day, 3 hours and 20 minutes into a scrim block, when there's a tense conversation and everyone's online and can't read each other's body language? Like, who are you in those moments, and do you like that person? Is that coherent with who you want to be? So doing that over time is thought to increase self-awareness, which we could easily make the case is crucial for coaching. So and I thought it was relevant for today, because like we've got so much wonderful material from you, from opening up your coaching practice at Nord. And yeah, it's been great to watch. And I think, as you say, that the team sounds great and seems to be doing things in a really constructive way. So very exciting. Not to mention resurrecting NLC. Awesome. So
Don't
yeah.
think we can take credit for that, but we're at least riding the wave of a resurrected NLC.
Well, you explained it, I think, in your Q&A video. you explained, and I'd missed this. Just the new league operator made it possible for.
And
I
the
think it
new
was
league
Caden.
arrangement, yeah, the
Yeah.
RL
So
system.
even you just doing that has helped me enormously. So shall we say John Ellis single-handedly resurrected?
Yeah, no problem, no problem.
Okay.
Great, that was really
Yeah.
useful. Thanks for that, and I hope it was useful for everyone listening as well. I mean, if you can find someone to do that with you, it'll be useful. If
Yes.
not, message Watson, by the way.
Let's do it.
You can use this
Go.
as a calling card.
Yeah, I'll try and be a point of sense making. So, um, a nice a nice way just to end that would be reflective practice. And this isn't my quote; it's from a professor, Brendan Cropley, who's done an enormous amount of research into reflective practice. He describes reflective practice as looking back, making sense, learning, improving future action. And the practice part, it's not just self-reflection; it's habitual, which makes it a practice.
Mm.
So that's that.
I I think that's so crucial, by the way. Just one of those steps in there, which is wait, read them out again. Sorry.
Should have them on top of my head, really, shouldn't I? Looking back, making sense, learning,
Yeah.
improving future action.
That making sense one, I think, is often the the one that's like one of the best things to do about this. There's another structure that I've used a bit in the past, which is from someone who's more involved, I think, in executive coaching, where he wrote a book about narrative coaching, he called it. And what I'm realizing now is it's just the same sort of idea, but more focused on like the a story where you basically go gradually more deeper into it and then back out, but more what you wanted to happen. How did you feel about
Nice.
it? So it's like, what happened? How did you feel about it? How did the other person react or whatever? And then the reverse to kind of reframe it. But its whole premise is what happened didn't matter. It's the story that we told ourselves about what happened.
Yeah.
That's the part that's important. And so
Yeah.
that's also why it's worth doing these kind of things, because you might remember it completely differently
Yes.
from what actually happened.
Yeah, and actually that's a big point of contention in the self-reflection literature is that actually human beings have pretty poor memory
Mm,
recall, and our recall is shaped by how we want to feel about something and how we actually, so what they're saying, there's like two schools of thought, is like reflect often, you'll get better at it, but also there's a distinction between reflecting on action, so reflecting after the instance of something happening, and that in that moment there is memory degradation. So you might not remember all details clearly, or you might shape them differently to actually what happened. And then there's this idea of reflection in action. So are there ways that you can, as close as possible to an instance, reflect on it and even record it to reflect on exactly what happened. So you could do things like, I mean, you have all the material now. So you have a recording of yourself speaking and you have a visual of yourself in the moment, and you can reflect on that. And you know that you can actually remember everything that happened very clearly and objectively. One step even further, which is really hard to do in esports, would be to, in the moment, be thinking, you're even making notes or speaking out loud why you're observing what you're observing, or why you're thinking what you're
that's the
thinking.
great part about the stream, is that I'm
Yeah.
starting to just talk. And I always think of your like talk out loud coaching thing. Like every time I start doing it, I'm like, this is actually quite useful to just be talking to a chat
Yeah.
while you're coaching. One question I would have for the reflection thing is, you were saying this is a contention that people have with reflection, that we don't remember things how they actually happened. But does how they actually happened matter? Like, isn't the whole thing that matters is how you think about them and how you remember them? At least from a personal point of view, isn't that part of the point of the reflection, is to work out how you actually feel and thought about the thing that happened?
I suppose if it, on a we're setting up the second segment, but on a well-being standpoint, yeah, it's nice to feel good about what happened, and if we
Mm,
shape things so that we feel we
yeah,
remember them
but
well.
I guess what I mean is like, so from this discussion, if it's going to be this discussion that we had as a team, I mean, if it's going to be useful for the players, it doesn't matter what the discussion actually was. I don't need them to be able to recreate who said what. It's about how they remember it, which they're probably going to misremember a bunch of stuff and forget a bunch of stuff and all that kind of thing. But they're remembering it in however they do it is more important than what actually happened. Like the truth, I said this quite a lot actually, weirdly. The truth doesn't really matter to me in coaching. It's more like the story that we told about it to ourselves. So is that not the same with the reflection side of things, or do we have to be objective?
think just for the purpose of self-awareness, you want it to be as crystal clear or as true as it was, because like I think from a coaching standpoint, you could say, yeah, I handled that really well, and in actual fact, several players on your team really disliked who you were in
Mm,
the moment,
mm.
and so it needs to be
A shared story,
objectively.
at least.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So if everyone's shared recollection of it is it's awesome and it
yeah.
wasn't awesome, then maybe don't worry about
If
it.
it
But
doesn't
like,
matter.
yeah,
This is just my thing in general. It's the same with like mental models or like personality quizzes and all that kind of thing. The I'm not concerned with if they're like truthful or not. Like I want it's whether it's useful. Well, that's the only thing that matters to me. But anyway, sorry, we're getting off topic. Let's move to the second point of the day. So you already touched on it, but we wanted to discuss coach well-being.
yeah. So I listened to a phenomenal podcast, but on the Sports Psych show, hosted by a sports psychologist called Dan Abrahams, and he had two researchers in talking about their work on coach well-being, and there was so many points in there that I thought was interesting, and they touched on things like what does well-being mean to a coach, and why I thought this was interesting for today's conversation was that when we think about well-being, you often think in terms of like human resource talk, so having work-life balance, for example. These researchers spoke to hundreds of coaches, and they said that doesn't exist. When I'm in season, I'm sometimes working 18 hours a day, and it's on my mind all the time. And the idea that I I can only judge my well-being by whether I'm having work-life balance, that would almost certainly indicate that I'm in a horrible state. So for coaches, maybe it needed to be contextualized more and be something different. And actually, one of the things I liked was sort of, yes, self-care behaviors, but also thinking of what gives us energy and what steals our energy and takes our energy. And then I watched one of your Q&As, and I know I already knew this about you, but you said that, you take care of your well-being and you do things like gym every day, you have your physical activity breaks, sauna, um, preferably work during the day, deep thought during the day. And it just got me thinking, like, now that we're into the split, a few weeks into the split, like, how is your well-being? How are you looking after yourself? Are you finding it? Is it working for you, looking like
Mm,
doing those things, or are you
mm.
finding that they get sidelined because of the workload?
Well, yeah. I guess I have to be honest about this in case my wife watches it later. Um, it's been tough actually. It's been not the best for the well-being, like managing work-life balance side of things. There's a fantastic book that I've mentioned a few times called The Tough Stuff, which goes into this as well, but very much from he's a coach. He actually does he coaches coaches in sport. So he's a coach who spends a lot of time talking with other coaches, and it's more like not research, but just anecdotal. But the exact same thing. And there's two things, yeah. So there's the sort of physical well-being side, and then there's the work-life balance side. So I'll address the physical well-being side first. In general, I think that's been going okay. I think pretty good. It's been tough to sort of get back into the streaming thing and sorry, the scrimming thing,
Mm,
um, with like 6 hours of pretty intense, pretty much all the time, because there's obviously breaks and there is times where I can leave and go and walk or do something or whatever. But often it's like then I have to come back and watch at times two the stuff I missed. So it's not exactly like anything stops. And then of course when the review comes around, which is in between the games, that's the most intense part for me. So it's not like I can really relax during the game. But I have been getting better and better, and I'm definitely better now at trusting myself with taking more of it easy. So we're focusing mostly on waves at the moment. If I know the intention for the session is to be on waves, I just chill out a bit in the early bit of the game and I enjoy it and I watch it like I'm a fan and I just let it wash over me a bit because I trust that I'll be able to not only get back into it, but also that I can like pick things up if I need to while still watching in a kind of relaxed way. So that's been interesting, and actually, to be honest, having the chat and having the streaming aspect of it has been much more engaging, which helps you stay engaged and helps you not just like wait for it to be over, kind of thing, and wait for it to be like now it's my turn to do the talking bit. And then I've been testing out a bunch of physical stuff, which has been useful. So I stand either every review or I stand for game 3 or something like that. I've been trying to get away to do some exercise in between every game, which is good. You can't see it now, but I've dug out a little massage chair thing that I'm doing occasionally for like back massage kind of stuff. It's also been very good for me to have Thomas doing the drafting. So when the draft starts, I listen to it, but that's when I go and do press ups in the other room with my headset on because I can just trust that it'll happen. And the whole point is if it all falls apart, I don't want to jump in because it's waiting to see how he jumps in and fixes it. So the physical well-being side of it is going okay. Kind of a stupid story. I really wanted to set up a chin-up bar in my flat because in my entire life I've never been able to do chin-ups until like this year. Well, maybe when I was a kid, but in my
I'm jealous.
post 18 life, I've never really been able to do multiple chin ups, and so I've been really enjoying it and really wanting to do them, and I do them every time I go to the gym, and it's like the perfect thing in between games. Chin ups, press ups, like you get both, you push pull, like you get both sides. It's great, and I've basically been trying to put this thing up for like a week. There was like finding the right wall, which I got the wrong wall first, so I made a big mess and I couldn't put it up there. And then on the right wall, but I was using these expansion screws that I've not used before, and I think I did them in the wrong way. But then like every time I had to like go to different shops to find out what I need, all this kind of thing. So that has meant that I actually haven't gone to the gym because I've been too busy setting up
Oh,
a little mini gym in my home, which is quite an interesting thing. Um, so yeah, that's the physical side of it. But the other like work life balance side of it, I've been really struggling with. So
mhm.
I wanted and told the players very much that look, my schedule is going to be different from yours. Actually, Matt has the same schedule as me. He gets up earlier than me even. But I don't want to do the esports schedule. I want to start work at 8 a.m. and I want to finish work when we're done with scrims. So that's 7 or 8 or something like that. It's not 12 hours of work. I hate it when people pretend like it's like I hate it when people pretend like they're working 16 hours a day when they're not. And in esports, I think they're not. That's a separate point. There's a separate rabbit hole that we won't dive into right now. But it's been very difficult for me to then actually fully switch off. And then people message me and I'm like, I can't. It's so hard to. What I would love is a way to somehow have it in a completely separate environment and then just never see it. So a work phone that's logged into my work Discord and then my personal Discord and my personal phone are completely separate. That's what I'd love. But I can't do that. And I have a bit of a focus problem. So if I get any messages, it's very difficult for me to switch off from them. And the other thing is that, okay, let's say we're scrimming a bit later and it's 3 and it's going to be until like 8 or 8:30, or even scrimming in the evening. I'll have a few meetings and stuff that I know I need to do in the morning. And then I'll say that I have time off to my wife, for example. But then one time we were out shopping and I got some messages from a player that were very urgent and meant I had to like leave. But even while I hadn't left, I looked at my phone and suddenly like I'm not there with her. Like
Mm.
I'm trying to solve this problem, this fire that's burning in the team. Um, and so what I'm hopefully going to start doing is kind of treating it more like on call. So a friend of mine works in tech sector and he works in network security, and he has a lot of times where he's on call. And so it's like I'm not working, but I'm at home, and if you have a problem you can message me and I'll reply and I'll jump on the phone and that kind of thing. And it can be for long stretches, and maybe nothing happens, but at least it's like this way to think about it differently. And what I was sort of doing is saying like, okay, look, I have some time now and we can spend some time together and that's great. But the problem is that then she then doesn't have anything else to do. And then I suddenly leave partway through or something like that. So having these extra differentiation would be really useful. So like Fridays our day off from swimming, but I've been working pretty much all day.
Yeah.
because it's just like we had a staff meeting in the morning, then doing like some prep for this, and then sorting out a few things of what everyone else is going to do over the weekend. And hopefully, I'm going to take tomorrow and at least have a half day of off, but then I can have hopefully a half day of on call, and at least in my head, maybe try and get that kind of differentiation. But the biggest thing for me is it's just the time frame is ridiculous. That's why it's ended up like this, I think. So I got the job on Christmas Eve, started work on Boxing Day, and had like so I've only had a few weeks before the very first game, and in that time had to put together a staff and also a team, and also start playing together as a team. And I would love to have been playing with the team since November, so it's like a lot to do. And so what I'm trying to do with this staff is get to the point where people can take a lot of the major parts of it from me, so that I can spend more time working with the staff. So the thing that I always say that I think people don't appreciate is the more people you have on your team, not just coaches, the more percentage of your time is spent managing them rather than doing the job. So that's something that I didn't appreciate for sure when I was younger. And if I've now got, there's 6 people or whatever who are working as coaches on all different areas, and none of them are full time, but still, that means a bigger part of my job needs to be managing that. And the problem is that at this stage, we haven't found a way for people to take the main part of the coaching day to day from me, and do it to the level and in the way that I want. Because how could you do that with no time for interviewing staff, but also no time for like a staff boot camp or getting together or really making a plan? So we're kind of doing that all at the same time. And that's why I
Yeah.
think it's just spiraled massively into this thing of being on all the time, which I really wanted to try and avoid this time around. I wanted to try and make it so it was like, okay, there are times when I'm definitely on and there are times when I'm definitely not. But at the moment, it's been hard to find that time of being fully off. And so what I'm trying to do is find some time to be fully off, but also find some time where I can be clearly like on call and half, which will work from both sides, hopefully. And maybe that differentiation will be healthy as well for everyone involved.
Yeah. Fantastic. I mean, I suppose just from my side, like, thank you for being so open about that. That's probably the reality, I think, for many coaches. I think my own experience working with teams was that the support staff usually get the call. If you got the call Christmas Eve, we'd probably be halfway through Christmas dinner before before we got a message even asking about availability. So, yeah, I think the last minute nature doesn't help at all. And actually, it's a really interesting point because I know that you've added specialists to the coaching staff, and wonderful idea. But of course, I hadn't thought about this. Everyone needs to be up to speed with how
Mm,
you would like, you know, the journey to go. So, actually, it adds more managerial demand
definitely.
on your time,
Yeah.
and
And to
yeah,
be clear, that's what I want. Like what I want in an ideal world. And I've talked to some LET teams about this, and I will continue to do so. And part of the reason for doing this Nord thing so publicly is I want to show that it is still the best thing to do. But part of what I want to do is what I've been doing for the last 2 years, but for a team. So I want to be a
yeah,
head coach, but more like a line manager for all the other coaches that are on the team, because I just truly believe that there's no coach who wouldn't be better with having someone coach them. And I think we can just get so much more value by doing it that way round. Um, but the problem that we've got here at the moment is with no budget. So finding someone who is at the level that I want the coaching to be, so that we can win in a very short time frame, like win the league, while also having to get someone much less experienced because there's no budget. It's always like how do you ever balance that?
yeah,
And then I am very anal about the details. Like I want it to be a really good standard, and even the stuff that has been going elsewhere. Of course, I can't ever look at it and not think like, okay, here's how we do this better and all that kind of thing. And that's great, and that's the whole point, like I say. But it does then. That's another huge amount of work for me. So when I was doing just private clients, I would only have. I said the max I was ever going to have was going to be 10, like 2 a day, and we've got 7 members of staff plus scrims every day. and competitive game and all this kind of thing. So it's like it's never gonna at this stage it's still about finding that balance, and it will be a long process, and that's the problem because we don't have a lot of time.
Mm.
And also, like I say, unfortunately there was no time to interview staff members. It was basically like I set them a task, and if the task was good enough, I was like, yeah, sure, because we didn't have any money. So it was like I wasn't going to turn people away who were up to a good enough standard. So yeah, it's been strange, and I do think going forward in a professional team, even I think in a fully professional team when you're all in person, I would still like to try to stick to just work time, not work time. But especially when you're online, I do like this idea of experimenting with on call sort of attitude where like, okay, look, if I start work at 8 and I finish all my stuff by 10:30, I'm fully prepared for scrims. I've listened and replied to all the reflections from all the players and all the staff, and there's nothing else to do. Everyone knows what they're doing, everyone's preparing, everyone's working, and scrims don't start until 2. Then I can have on call time until 2. And I think that's okay because I was previously thinking now it's off time, but it's not. It's not at all. so, so I completely agree with that sentiment. That it's very difficult to be off, and I think um, if you have time where you're on call, then at least you can try and have some time where you are fully off and you don't feel sort of guilty about it. Um, but I also don't buy that like that's a problem that only coaches have. I think anyone who loves their job is going to think about it when they're not at their work. And so I don't like this thing that we tend to do in high performance where we act as if like we're the only ones who keep thinking about our job on a weekend. And I think most people do, whether they like their job or whether they dislike their job, they often still think about it on the weekend. So it's
Yeah.
something that everyone needs to, I think, strive for, finding a way to actually get fully switched off. So a great thing that we do that is actually for my sleep, but also has been very useful for this is like I just have no screens like 2 hours before I go to bed. So at 9 o'clock, it all turns off. So I can't even see that I've been messaged, which is a very useful, very useful thing.
Yeah. That sounds very healthy. I mean, very pragmatic strategies. Actually, I think one of the ones I heard in the past was the having 2 Discord accounts. So one
Mm.
would be actually it was more, I think, a support staff member, and it was just so that they could jump on and have some games themselves without clients seeing that they were online and messaging them. So
Yeah.
even that was like a line they could draw, which was healthy. But yeah, as a coach, it's also difficult because you want to do a good job, you want to be there,
Mm.
and we all know that seems to be like such a crucial part of being an
Mm.
effective coach. So especially at
And
this like formative stage, very difficult.
yeah, and also the more hours you put in, you will get better results up to a point, and it's so hard to find where that point is. And it's only because I've been doing this for so long that I realize that this point is so much earlier than I used to think it was.
Yeah.
Um, and so I
As
do,
well,
yeah, tell people that directly. Like I'm going to switch off, and the reason I'm going to switch off is because if I don't switch off after scrims, I'm going to be worse next scrims, and that's worse for
yeah,
everybody. So if you've got problems, we'll deal with them in the morning.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, self-care, like we can't do our best if we're not at our best.
Mm,
So yeah, it's cool. And also you are adding to your plate that you want to develop your staff as well. So you want to be there for each individual. So that's more one-to-ones, more discussions. Yeah. Um, one other thing in this podcast was just the maybe thinking about well-being as not just an individual construct, not just an individual idea, but also that our well-being is also somewhat located in our relationships with those around us. And they spoke quite a lot about having trust in the team and developing a level of psychological safety where well-being was something that could be discussed and openly shared. Um, I think nice in theory, very difficult to achieve, especially in a remote League of Legends team, um, where I'm not I'm not sure like you'd have to have a very trusting relationship to be able to say as the coach, you know, workload and my obligation and my want to do a good job here, isn't sustainable at this point. Like, I think that's a conversation that's like very difficult to navigate in an online team, especially because I think it takes, you want to first of all demonstrate that you are invested, you show up, you do a great job, and it's just so hard to even prove that in the online setting because so much of that, those unseen hours are really unseen. It's not like you walk past someone in an office, you see them writing something, but you can't read what they're writing or what they're analyzing. It's that you just don't see them doing the work because you're in two geographical, like isolated locations. So
Yeah.
very challenging. But I think the message was like, do you have those people around you that you can offload on, that can maybe be reciprocally listening, but also supporting you and you supporting them? Um, yeah,
I think that one's crucial for me. One of the things that I did with all my coaching clients is these daily reflections, and we're doing that with the players as well. So
great.
the staff and the players, the staff is not necessarily every day because, like I say, they're not all full time, but the players each day, end of the day, record a voice note, and I do the same. Just started actually yesterday doing the same with someone else. So it's like it all, all goes up the chain. Hopefully not just they get frustrated and tell me and I get frustrated and tell Jamal, but we'll see. But yeah, just having that I think is so useful because I do it. I also do it over voice, which I think is a very good thing to do because you
Yeah,
sometimes
nice.
start talking and then it's like you realize you're actually super frustrated about it only after you started talking. And if I'd have just written it out, I'd been like, today's fine. It's got some ups and downs. But then I start talking, I'm like, today is fine. And then you realize
You
they're starting to
realize,
get
oh
frustrating
wait,
or something like that. So, yeah, yeah. Even I can't wait. Let me find it because replied today. The person that I'm doing it with a message as well, and part of the message even was about that. Let me find it. Don't feel like you need to fix everything. Just embrace the day and take the head coach hat off. That was perfect advice. Was talking
love
about
that.
something that I can't control, and I was like, I'm kind of worried about it. I think it's not going to go that well. And then, um, yeah, it's just a good point. Just let it happen. You know, it's not on
Great,
you. Occasionally,
great. So someone that, yeah, that's great. I mean, that's a great example of like well-being being, coach well-being being situated as sort of in the relationships. It's not just on you. So yeah, fantastic. And also great that you're, finding that time to look after your physical health because that's also one of those key fundamentals for, yeah, staying healthy and fit and avoiding that burnout. So
I think as well. Actually, scrims do give you a fantastic opportunity to do that kind of thing. And I don't know what I would do in a normal work environment, but I would really, it's uh, all this like kind of cliched advice or advice that you get everywhere, like, oh, take a break every 20 minutes or whatever.
yeah,
It's actually really useful. It's the reason why
yeah,
we get it everywhere. And to be honest, the thing that's really fun for me is that um, once I get this chin up bar installed, uh, if I ever, it's also actually going to end up being like a lot of a workout over a whole day that I just don't need to worry about. But I can notice so much easier when I get out and do some movement, just like squats or press ups or whatever, and then come back for the review. It's like it's so noticeable so quickly.
yeah,
And especially actually yesterday, for example, because it was the day after competitive, and there was a few games where, especially when we weren't playing well, people were getting like the energy was just gradually lower and lower and lower. And it's almost like now's the time. I'm going to quickly do some star jumps so that when I talk to them, I can hopefully bring us back some of the energy. But then you're in this weird state where like you put everything into that one review to make it as energetic as possible, so that then the next game starts, I'm like, oh, but
I'm not.
as what maybe it's what you need to do, So it's an interesting balance, and it's been really fun doing it in a public way, whether it's like on stream. So I'm telling my chat that I'm going to go do this, or I'm telling my chat, okay, I need to make sure I bring them the energy this next game and that kind of thing. It just makes it a lot more fun.
I'm having visions of you in the future in a spin class, leading a review, just headset on, super high
I
intensity.
mean, I have to say, one of the things I talked to Goto on about this on the other podcast I do, the Coach Talk one. One of the things that I would do if we were in person is I'd make us do stand up reviews, I think, and I would know that there will be so much pain in those first, like that first week, because standing up for half an hour is hard.
Yeah.
And we don't really think about it, but you get used to it. And then when you were used to it, it'd be so much better. But yeah, S-
You
or
should.
like, yeah, just before a meeting, just quickly running off and doing like a bunch of star jumps and then, then coming back.
Yes. I'll I'll drop a phrase here that is super, like, it's straight out of my sports science textbooks, but NEAT. Get up your NEAT. So
Yeah.
NEAT is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So
Yeah.
increase the non-exercise movements that you do in the home, and you'll quickly see like steps increase, time in sort of non-sedentary behavior massively increases, all very, very healthy things to do.
Mm.
And actually, the acute effects of that short bout of exercise, so that short walk, that 20-minute standing before having to concentrate, there was actually a really nice paper on, I think it was League of Legends players, so in esports, and it was a whole paper about the effect of 5-minute physical activity breaks between games. And they had some nice brain scan images in the paper, and it was very clear that cognitive function improves after like an acute bout of exercise. And if that's good for performance of players, of course it's going to be good
Mm.
for coaches. So
Freddie, our mid laner, has started doing walking in circles. I don't know why he specifies that he's walking in a circle, but in the break, it's like, okay, go have a break, go walk in some circles. And I don't know if he's literally, I should check his stream. I don't know if he's literally just walking in like a tight circle, but I'm imagining a bigger circle in my head.
that
But
is
just
hilarious.
it'd be hilarious to see. So yeah, I think that kind of stuff is really, really
Yeah,
useful.
amazing.
And we've got these breaks so often. So like make the most of them, like you've got a very
Yeah,
easy break point. Game is done. Okay. Go and do
yeah.
something.
I used to work with a player who had a shower in the like 3-minute break between game and review, and I couldn't believe he got it. Like,
That's
how do you get
wild
that?
actually. That is a that's probably very useful if you can manage it, but that's too
I mean,
short.
yeah,
You need a
yeah,
cold plunge in behind me in the room
yes,
so I can just
exactly.
or
Jump in.
you can imagine like the game is getting a bit frustrating. The players are like, oh no, we're losing. And then you just see on my stream, I just quickly walk and jump into this pool.
Gotta go for a dunk.
It's the future.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, right. Talk about ice bars. Combining that with esports, awesome,
Mm.
brilliant. So, I mean, that's the end of, I think, the 2 points of academia for today's stream. But you had some more
Yeah.
esports events
Yeah,
to
the,
note.
the one that I think is really good that I want to get talk about with you is we had this absolute fantastic opportunity where Rekkles, who is now in the NLC, which you can watch every Wednesday on wherever you watch it, he went to Worlds with T1 and then did a really long sit down interview with Cajal. Absolutely fantastic interview. Great to hear so many insights, but was able to talk just super openly about how T1 coach at Worlds, so the most successful esports team of all time, how they do their structure, how they are, and there's a few things that instantly jumped out to me, and I thought you would also appreciate before I sent it over. So I don't know if you want to just kind of we could just go through them one by one, or
Sure. Yeah.
yeah. So the first thing that he mentioned. First thing, but maybe not the most crucial, is that when they're at Worlds, they spend almost all the time just talking about draft. They play the game in scrims and then they just talk about draft. He said 95% at least of their discussions as a team is just about the champions that they picked in that game. And for me, I think probably people have heard that and misrepresented it and misunderstood it. But for me, I don't think that's how they do their entire year. But when they're at Worlds, you're already at the competition. That for me just shows the fundamental difference with how the West has been approaching Worlds and how Korea has. I mean, he spoke about that as well. Like when the first time they were winning a game, he was like clapping and really excited, and all the coaches were like
Yeah.
nothing because obviously they're there to win the whole thing, not to win a group stage game. But beating BLG in the group stage is like huge moment if you're if you're a Western team. But this is another one where they're not there to be like we're going to get as good as we can during this tournament. They're there saying this is how good we are. So the only thing left to focus on is the draft and the meta. There's no learning the game. There's no like, how are we going to approach playing Baron? There's just the only thing left to do is learn the champions. And I think it's getting better. I've talked to a couple of coaches who have also come to the same conclusion, having been to Worlds a lot of times. I mean, I think Max spoke about it, and Pad as well in our interview, where they said, look, the first 3 or 4 times we went to Worlds, we go and do the Korean schedule of scrims. So we have been doing 5 scrims all the time. Then we go and we do 2 in the morning, then we do 5, then we do 3 at night. And we try and like, it's like you're going to learn as much as possible. You're going to get beaten up by the Eastern teams, and then you review the games afterwards to see how you could become a good team. And it's like, this is the performance stage. You know,
Right.
is there something that you will learn in this week that is worth it? I think this idea of, right, we've done all our learning. Now we're just the only thing that's different is we're on a new patch and we need to learn the patch. So we need to talk draft. So everything else is irrelevant. We know how we should set things up. We know how we should play objectives. We know what kind of objectives we value. We just need to learn the draft. And I think this is absolutely a fantastic one. Like, people seem really confused when you get to the end of a World Cup, for example. There was a thing about it in rugby a couple of times ago, I should say. Sorry. So England were in the World Cup final, and there was a big hoo-ha about the fact that they had like one light training session, and there was a big like thing of like, oh, you're not preparing enough. It's like, what? We're going to learn how to play rugby in this last week, and like, what? This is the performance stage. This is not the learning stage. And so for me, I think we have teams now that say they want to go to Worlds and perform, but they go to Worlds and their actions are the actions of a team that is learning. And
Mm.
like, we should be thankful to be able to scrim Eastern teams, and we should learn as much as possible from them. And I think, again, if you take the example of what Mac and Pad are doing, they're trying to build this structure where the first time we go, we are going to go to learn, but we're going to do it openly. We're going to go and say, that's why we're talking about 3 years with everybody, because the first year we're going to learn. The second year we're going to perform, knowing that we're all going to be there together for the third year as well. And that, I think, is just a really interesting way, an interesting thing about their approach. And yet all the comments are like, oh, it's because they believe that draft is the most important thing. And for me, I think it's
Yeah.
probably got
Yeah.
nothing to do with that. I think it's probably just being conscious about what they're learning. So that for me is a big one, where we haven't yet, I think, grown up enough in esports to work out how to really get that periodization and planning, rest, recovery kind of thing in.
Yeah.
Because I mean, to take a specific example, I told him this to his face as well, so I feel like I can say it. But I think that the idea that with G2 and like Roman's thing of like, we're going to win everything in Europe and then do well at Worlds, for me, those are not the same goal. I think that doing the best possible at Worlds is not the same as the team that does the best possible at Worlds with those players and that structure is not the team that does the best possible during the whole year, because you can't be good for the whole year. And where you listen to someone like Simon Cox, for example, talking about how he would structure an Olympic program, obviously they've got once every 4 years, it's a bit of a longer thing, but he would literally say, and he said he would tell athletes, like, they would have specific goals, like, this tournament we want to make top 12. And it's like, you say, oh, you should always go to try and win. And it's like, yeah, I mean, try and win the important ones, like target
Yeah.
the things you want to win.
Yeah.
But yeah, what do you think about that kind of thing, and how we structure the plan rather than just be as good as we can, as much as we can all the time, is what we currently do in our actions at the very least.
Yeah. I'm trying to be quite reductionist about it, because what really matters to peak your skill when you need to. And in traditional sport, like NBA basketball, the playoffs, the rugby, World Cup, like you say, it's like the frequency of games and the physicality. It makes sense not to have full training sessions between games that might be separated by a day, because it just interrupts the physical recovery and you need to peak again. When you're talking about I briefly watched that part of the interview, and yeah, to play devil's advocate, to to analyze draft for that many hours after a scrim block, and then the first thing when you wake up in the morning,
Mm.
just being a bit naive to the value of a draft. I mean, I've been part of my fair share. I even listed it as a head coach in the UK LC during a draft once, which was interesting. But it just seems to me like diminishing returns on how many hours we invest, and at the same time, I would almost say, like, if they're feeling that ready, you could almost say, like, just from a sports science perspective, actually a complete screen break could be even more beneficial. But then I don't know what the value is of 6 hours of draft prep versus 12. So, I mean, my initial devil's advocate feeling was like, okay, I get that you feel like your shared understanding of how you want to play the game is there. Your individual mechanics feel sharp. So then the only thing is to be prepared for every eventuality in the draft. But then, such a complex game, can we ever be? So that was the only devil's advocate thing. I don't know if there's anything in that.
Yeah. I think it's a good point. For me, the main thing that I was kind of focusing on is what percentage of their work time are they spending on what. But I think you're right. There's also the argument that they could also, if they are 100% on these other things, they could actually just spend less time in total. And to be honest, who knows really? Maybe they do. maybe the amount of time that they were working is less than normal, because unfortunately we didn't have someone who's going to do a long interview, because they're very secretive, who's going to do a long interview based on their normal split.
Right. That's true. Yeah, it could be.
So it could be already a reduction.
Gosh, yeah.
I think it probably is just the shift, rather than the reduction. I think there is always extra value with more time, and that's one of these things that's the same as we said. There's always more value in more coaching time, but you've got to find that balance. So I'm not suggesting for a second that they did find that balance exactly. Obviously, they won, which is nice, but I don't think they found the balance for sure. But they found it in a way that worked for them.
Yeah.
So for me, the interesting part was mostly just what they spent their time on, as opposed to how much they spent, because you can, and also if a player says I'm doing 4 hours of draft, I take it with a bit of a pinch of salt. Personally, we had a 2-hour draft meeting the other day, and I think it was at least an hour too long. So
Right.
that's my personal thought on it, because what you tend to do is you tend to go over a bunch of things and then none of them come up and you go in these really massive rabbit holes. But it can really make the difference between winning and losing when you're at the top level, for sure. When you're at that level, I think it makes less difference in like the LEC and stuff like that. But at the later stages of Worlds, when you've been playing on the same patch for a long time, the draft itself can be a huge like game breaking component. That's for sure. So yeah, it could be that they could have used that time to chill instead, or to focus on the recovery. But I don't think we can know about that. So I think it's a good point for sure. But for me, the thing that jumped out was just the sort of approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, maybe who knows? Like maybe they're getting their 8 hours of quality sleep and they're starting with some exercise. And like I said earlier with the coach well-being, maybe this is the thing that gives them energy. Like this is the part of the year where they want to be giving their all to being as ready as possible. And as you say, understanding what the optimal draft for them is, given the recent changes. Maybe that's the way they want to spend their time, and that's what gives them energy. So, yeah, I mean, without, it's always easy to say without more information, we can't know for sure. But yeah, and also, it's kind of funny as well. Like they go on to win, so therefore, it is the optimal strategy. Like, also hard to say. Anyway, but fascinating nonetheless. And I do agree generally. I really like the idea of looking at your longer term competitive phase and saying we can't be 100% all the time. So what are we choosing to do in different moments? And I've seen that some of the best coaches I've worked with have actually said within a weekly cycle we can do the same thing. So we have experimental Monday.
Yeah,
We
I like
have
that. I loved it.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
also Simon Cox's idea, red, amber, green days for how much we're going to be taking it.
Intensity, exploring. Yeah.
yeah, I think there's so much more room for that in esports generally. So yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Then the next thing, we won't talk about the last one because it's a bit more of a specific thing about draft, which I won't go into because it's the details. But the
or
other
testing.
and biggest part of this,
Yeah.
which is that Rekkles, obviously very experienced European player, was shocked at how player led the whole situation was,
Mhm.
and how much came from the players and how much the coaches were there just to facilitate. And it was the players' idea, it was the players' picks. He even sort of was like, the players are in charge. And it was this massive shock to him compared to European teams. Now, the reason that this stood out to me, apart from the fact that we've both said many times that we think this is the way it should be, and this is better for a huge number of reasons, is that the argument is always that in Korea, where they're the best, the coach is just super in charge and super vertical. And even this interview has obviously got a few more views than our podcast. I think it's like, I don't know if it's 1 million yet, but like it's hundreds of thousands. And still people come with this idea that, like, well, in Korea they're super vertical because they have this whole thing about age, and the coach is normally the oldest, and so everyone instantly does what they say, and the coach can do whatever they want. And it seems like that's just not the case with this team, at least. Like, not even close. And the European player was the one saying, like, wow, this was so horizontal, if we use that horizontal vertical thing, or this was so democratic. They're much more the duff man than the I don't know, the coach that shouts at players. I don't know if there wasn't one that came to mind, but they're much more of that listening, shaping the discussion, framing it, drawing conclusions from the players rather than providing them themselves, and not being like, oh, I know the most about the game, therefore listen to me, or anything like that. So that was the thing that just instantly stood out to me. And I was thinking, like, yes, this is awesome, because not only is
Yeah.
it just a great thing to hear, but it's also like a great counterpoint to anyone who thinks it should be the other way, and use, especially people still in on the streams. I've had comments of people being like, shouldn't you be a bit more like forceful with your opinions, because in Korea, where they're the best, like they're really forceful. It's like, well,
Yeah.
turns out, at least in one case where we actually know, they're not. So who knows if they ever were? I'm sure they probably were at points. And we've seen
Yeah.
little clips of people shouting at players or whatever over the years. But that doesn't mean that was what it's been like in the day to day. So that
Yeah.
was a thing that jumped out to me.
Well, I love it, and I would say generally on board with that approach. And I think if we think about performance and like the competitive moment being a reflection of what is done in training, coach, you have probably a lot of influence over what happens in training. And in when it comes to competition performance, I think that's a great place to support players, give them what they need, but also like they can express themselves in that moment, and that will align with what probably they need to express in that moment, and there's things they want to say, and that's probably conducive to good performance. And I just feel like it kind of makes sense to treat the game day draft as like you've given them the frame, which is the strategy, and hopefully you've trained the things you want to train, like what you prioritize, what your how you want to like what's your identity, how you want to play objectives, how you want to communicate around objectives, how how you want to play tempo and that kind of thing. And hopefully you've done that work, and come those performance moments, actually
Yeah.
like giving the discussion to the experts, because they are the experts in those roles. It's it just sounds very healthy.
I think
So
the thing that stood out to Reckless as well was that when we're talking about how we should set up Baron or how we should play with tempo, the coach was quiet.
right,
So that's the part that was shocking to him, was that it was the players who were deciding how they play, and the coach was drawing it out of them, again in the way that we've discussed,
well
which
said.
is
Yeah, well
quite an
said.
interesting. It's just, yeah,
I
it was
think
just
that
fascinating.
well, that's the right terminology to say, because there isn't one coaching style, and we're not saying everyone sit back and say nothing.
Mm,
I would assume that the coach has learned that like it's an incredible tool in his arsenal to sit back and let that flow. And he might have done a lot of work, like you did at the start of the season, to say, like, I'm going to give you a lot of blank canvas and we're going to fill it with your thoughts, and I'm going to give you those opportunities. And if necessary, I'll steer the ship every now and then. But I think it might not work everywhere, but like it's a cool approach to try, because yeah, I mean, you know me, like part of my whole thing about esports coaching is that we are here for more than just the game. So if you are controlling every moment and giving players no opportunity to make decisions, like, we're not developing players.
Mm.
We
Mm.
are we're moving chess pieces, and that's yeah,
Mm.
resonates with me.
Yeah, and as Rekkles said as well, the coach isn't in the game. Like we
Yeah,
don't even have a
yeah,
timeout in basketball to be able to
yeah,
say like, okay, no, we need to do this play, or
yeah.
American football, for example, where you can literally call the play and like, yeah, they're on the field, they can override it, but you're constantly communicating. In League of Legends, starts, that's it. You're hands off at that stage. If it's a best of one, like once the draft is done, I got zero input on how this game shakes out. So yeah,
Except that I think you're a big process person and systems person, and I love that. And I think that you can still see the fingerprint of a coach in maybe just what players say immediately after draft. And my naive understanding of it would be, I've worked with coaches that put in the whole go through the 3 conditions, like matchups, lane assignments, win condition, immediately after draft. And it's like, we embed that in training. I don't lead it after draft as a coach, the players do, and it's
mm,
useful. We
mm.
evaluated it as useful. So you can still have a fingerprint. It's just
Yeah, for sure. But that's why I think it's so much better when it comes from
yeah,
them. Although the downside is, again, with these short splits, is it takes a lot longer. So
right.
that's, again, something I'm going to need to balance going forward, where I'm just not used to playing a split with this few scrims. So something that might have to become a bit more coach led, just because we have a lot of areas to cover, and if we discuss it and get 7 people's opinion rather than just my opinion, it might take too long. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's a conversation that we've covered before. So if you're interested, do check out previous episode. I think literally the last episode was the one that was about this horizontal vertical thing, because we were talking about Duffman's approach, which is very much along this same vein of, he said, sometimes I just don't even speak and I'm just listening, and then I'll have comments the next day about it, or stuff like that, or bring things to them the next day. So
yeah.
okay, well, anything else you want to add on for the end? I mean, already going for an hour and 45 minutes, so potentially
No,
getting
this has
to
been
that
great.
stage. Yeah.
It's been really fun. I think we've maybe kicked off 2025
Yeah,
with some
officially.
major positives. I just wanted to commend you for like the work that you're doing and the way that you're, I think, sharing real value to aspiring coaches. And yeah, it's really interesting, really valuable learning. And I think
Thanks.
hopefully an interesting exercise for you. You
Mm.
did say that you had some teaser that was dropping after 6
Oh yeah,
European, but
it is out now. Yeah. So next week we're going to a boot camp. So we're
oh,
all going
great,
to be in person finally. Let me just check. It is
amazing.
out. Yeah, that's true.
Oops,
Yes. So we're actually going to the place where our mid laner lives. So we're going to go to Munich and do a whole
fantastic,
week together. So we'll do a bunch of exercises that you guys will see stuff of. You'll see full details of a lot of it, not necessarily full details of all of it, but a lot of it. And we'll be doing our competitive games from there and scrims from there and stuff like that. So yeah, like we were
amazing.
saying, having discussions around what respect means, and also readdressing how this conversation went in person is what I was thinking. But at that stage was technically like 10 minutes before the tweet went out. So now we're half an hour after, so we get to talk about it. That's when I would always like to do those situations, because as you say, you see the body language, get to actually look each other in the eye, and hopefully by that point we've done a few more things of getting to know each other properly. So I will actually experiment. If we talk about respect, I'll experiment with this idea of like, okay, I want you to say it to me from the other person's point of view if we have another argument, and I'll see how it goes.
Yeah,
Well, you'll see how it
fantastic,
goes as well, because it'll be streamed. So if it's a disaster, we'll
awesome.
all enjoy it together.
Yeah, Christmas has come early. It's just been, but cool. All right.
Great.
Well, yeah. Thanks, John.
Yeah.
And
Thanks for
that
doing the
was really
reflection as
great,
well. I
great
think it
fun.
was really, really useful. And thanks everyone for watching. You'll be able to find the full thing on YouTube as well as on Twitch, although the Twitch VOD will only stay up for a little while, but you'll see it on YouTube and it'll be there forever. So thanks very much for watching and hope you have a good evening.